From the News Channel 5 Network, this is the Takacs McGinnis Elder Care Law Hour.
Welcome to Takacs McGinnis Elder Care Law Hour, where we explore the many issues that arise due to aging, disability, and unexpected illness. I'm your co-host, Tim Takacs.
And I'm Barbara McGinnis. October is Resident Rights Month, and we're going to be talking today about rights, respect, dignity. But before we get into that topic, we're going to start talking about arbitration. It's a real hot topic, especially related to admissions to a long-term care facility. Tim, if you'll start us off by just talking about what is arbitration and how is that different from mediation or litigation?
Well, arbitration is kind of like having a judge who's not a judge, but it's somebody that is a private person or trained, and so that person sits down, and there are the sides of, there's the facility, there's the consumer, the resident, and they present their case, and then the arbitrator makes a decision. That's not a judicial proceeding. In other words, it's not like going to court, which of course that's litigation. That's where we say sometimes that's where you go in front of a real judge.
Right.
In mediation, and a lot of times people hear, well, what's the difference between arbitration and mediation? Mediation is where you have somebody who typically is trained to basically help the parties try to reach an agreement or clarify the issues and to see whether an agreement actually can be reached.
I think another key point that maybe people don't realize is with arbitration, once that third party reaches a decision and imposes a decision upon the parties, there's no appeal rights.
Right. Typically, so it's like forced arbitration or mandatory arbitration or say voluntary arbitration, which is kind of like a big deal right now.
Well, and so the whole concept between forced arbitration versus voluntary is some situations actually it would lend itself well to being settled by arbitration.
Sure.
And so two parties could agree to go to arbitration for the reasons that you would choose that over going to court.
Right.
In theory, it's supposed to be less expensive, and it's not supposed to take as long, though that's not always the case. But forced arbitration is when you sign a contract that says, I agree to go to, I agree because I want this service, and as a condition of receiving this service, I am signing this contract that says I'll go to arbitration. And it's probably buried in some fine print. So examples like your credit cards, your cell phone, probably. Your cell phone contracts, your cable contracts, a lot of those, and even some employment contracts.
Right. Sometimes it'll say something like, well, like you said, is if you want cell phone service, guess what? You have to sign an agreement, and that agreement basically waives your right to go to court.
And we agree that we're going to go to arbitration, and guess who gets to pick the arbitrator?
Yes,
the person that's writing the contract.
Exactly. Right.
So for all those reasons, I think the average person would say that doesn't sound very fair.
Yeah. Well, the problem is, and it's one thing where you say, all right, do I want this credit card or not? Then
you can walk away.
You can walk away from that. It's one thing. Do you really want that cell phone, or you want that cell phone service? So maybe you go to some other provider. But when you're going into a long-term care facility, and you're knocking at the door, and you have no other options. Many people feel like they have no other options because you've gone right from the hospital to a skilled nursing facility, and before you get in, they say, well, no, you're not getting past our door and getting these essential services unless you waive your right to file suit against us, which is essentially what that is, or you agree to. That's called mandatory arbitration. You are forced
arbitration.
Exactly.
And part of the real the beef about these forced arbitration agreements is that you're making that decision pre-dispute.
Yes.
You don't even have a dispute yet, but you've agreed how you're going to resolve it if one occurs. And so I think that's there's an argument about you really don't have informed consent because there's not a dispute at that point.
Right. How do you know what arbitration is? Who's going to be the arbitrator? What are the issues even going to be?
Right. And if it doesn't get resolved the way an outcome that you think is right, you have no appeal rights.
You have no appeal rights, right.
So nursing homes, when you go in and you're admitting, you're signing that stack of admission papers,
right.
Do you have to sign the arbitration agreement?
Yes,
No.
Yes or no?
Yes or no? No.
No, true, right.
You don't have to.
Right.
But the admission person, staff member that's helping you complete these papers, they're not usually real quick to tell you, you don't have to sign that.
Yes.
They really want you to sign it. So
Sure.
only if you're an informed consumer and you don't have to sign that as a condition of admission, you're going to have to be that informed consumer and know that you don't really have to sign that. And even if you sign it, can you go back and rescind?
And sometimes you can. I mean, a lot of that is, that's one of the things that there's been a lot of movement in the law recently about that is that maybe it has to be in a separate sheet of paper. That if you sign, then you can go back maybe in 2 days or have a certain period of time and say, oh, by the way, I want to rescind. I don't agree with this now. So now that I'm already in the facility, you can't discharge me because I'm going to say that I don't agree to arbitration. But I did sign, just to sort of get in. So there's a lot of that sort of that's out there that's going on.
So the Center for Medicare and Medicaid, CMS.
Yeah, CMS.
They've been involved in this as it relates to nursing home patients,
right?
And whether or not there was a ban on it for a while,
yes.
And then they decided, I guess they didn't really decide. There was litigation on the part of the nursing home industry, and so it was. We call it enjoined. There was an injunction for a while that suspended the ban. So now you're seeing them again.
Right.
But there's an additional that Fair Act.
Fair Act, yeah. But before we get to the Fair Act, because and I don't want people to think that there's that everything about arbitration is wrong.
No.
You're right. So we've talked about maybe some of the disadvantages. Consumers really don't know what they're giving away or giving up. But what are the advantages of arbitration? Obviously, probably for the facility, they would say it's a way for them to control their cost or so on. But what about for the consumer? Why would a consumer want arbitration?
Well, again, in theory, it's supposed to be less expensive because you're not represented by legal counsel. You're just representing yourself in front of the arbitrator.
You can't have legal counsel on an arbitration?
I don't know that you can't have it, but you usually don't have it.
Right.
Because the standard rules of evidence do not apply. You're not petitioning. You're not presenting your case to a judge. You're just presenting yourself. You're to supposedly an industry expert.
Right.
So I guess for our interests, we're talking about long-term care.
Right.
So our arbitrator that would be making that decision would hopefully not be like a bridge building expert. They'd be an expert in long-term care.
Right.
So that would know the standards and the regs already.
Right.
So it's supposed to be faster because you don't have to wait for dockets necessarily, and we're just going in front of this person, presenting our case, so to speak, and then a decision would be reached. So again, the biggest advantage is less costs.
Right. But the real problem really is like the Forced Arbitration Injustice Repeal Act, which is really the Fair Act. That's not the problem, but that's the solution, right?
That is the solution, because for a lot of these
potential solution
that we do not have choices. Right. Obviously, your risk of harm from your cell phone carrier is a lot less than potentially a risk of harm when we're talking about care of a frail older person in a long-term care facility. So you want the Forced Arbitration Injustice Appeal Act.
Yeah.
Follow it. See what's happening. It was recently passed in the House. It's kind of just sitting around for the Senate to do something with. I don't think any real action's been happening with it in the Senate.
Okay. So we kind of talked about arbitration, so let's talk about residents' rights and the Ombudsman program. So please stay with us. We'll be talking about ombudsmans and residents' rights. Stay tuned.